Thank you. The smart grids of the future will not only connect up more renewable generation, but they will also allow for more electric vehicles, more domestic generation, and more independence. But we will not get there until we have what we call smart grids. Now, smart grids doesn't mean that we haven't had smart grids up to now. We have. But they have to meet changing times. And one of the signs of change I want to talk about today is the way that I'm creating some new thinking within the electricity sector, because it's very much a supply side driven sector with big power stations, big transmission lines. We're trying to get people to think differently about how customers of the future will participate with their grid. Because unless we have a strong grid, we are not going to be able to save emissions and get some of the renewable generation from deserts, from windy areas of the world into the urban centres. And New Zealand has a very, very good opportunity to pave the way for some of this to happen. And that's what I'm going to spend the next 8 minutes just giving you a bit of an insight to what we're doing. It's going to be very rushed, but there are signs of change going on in our electricity industry. So that's what I'm going to talk about. And for most of you, you will know that our grid represents the transfer of hydro from our lakes in the South Island into the North Island. It's very much a south to north grid, and it has what we call an HVDC link, high voltage direct current. A lot of countries are envious of our experience with HVDC because they're going to be used throughout the world now to take renewable generation into cities. The Chinese have just invested in the biggest HVDC link in the world. And when we have Pole 3 commissioned in 2012, we will have one of the most modern HVDC links in the world here. And we should be proud of that. But how are we going to use it well to help us in the future? Now, we have come, New Zealand, we have a very proud history in not only using renewable generation, but also in the way that we have controlled load, which people often fail to forget. We once just had a state hydro system, and it was only possible through the ripple control of hot water cylinders in people's homes. So people over the decades in New Zealand have helped the grid operate. Now it is timely for all this to be reviewed and for us to add onto this participation. And we're paving the way for some of this to happen here in the North Island. Now, interruptible load is needed to keep the lights on if there is a failure of a major generation station. You cannot afford the frequency to drop, and it is going to free up other resources, and it is going to displace, ultimately, coal-fired thermal units at Huntly. We have a barometer on the grid. Like your blood pressure, this measures the heartbeat of the grid, which normally runs at 50 cycles per second. If a major unit falls off the grid, the frequency drops very, very quickly. One of these combined cycle plants trips. We have to arrest that frequency fall or the lights go out. We had an event last Thursday morning. Otahu B tripped at 10:18. The lights stayed on. We participated in that and delivered 30 megawatts of IL as one of the participants in making that happen. So why is more IL needed? It's needed for our security of supply. It's certainly needed in the North Island because we do not have enough spinning reserve, and the grid in the North Island is lighter than the South Island. The technology that we are rolling out all comes from Wellington. It comes from a small company in Wellington that developed it 10 years ago, so it's a local success story. And we trialled it for the first time on the cold store on Wellington Port, which you've all seen walking around the harbour. That's where it's all come from. And what we're doing, we are rolling these smart grid meters, as we call them, out to a number of different sites. to make the grid more robust and give us more certainty in IL. For example, we can aggregate 1 cold store to 10 cold stores and have far more certainty in what we're doing. Okay, so cold stores are not the only sector. We're working with, in the North Island, all the water councils. We're working with the big pulp and paper sites, the big forestry sites, the big dairy sites, and the big meat sites. Now, none of these have participated before in an activity like this. That's why it's a sign of change, because it's telling us that they're happy to help keep the lights on and make the grid more robust. So we've gone from 2007 to where we are now with a deployment, and what we're trying to do is build up 100 megawatts of more security on the grid. So we believe it's the first time an aggregation like this has been attempted at this scale, and we are offering the grid a response. This might not mean much to you. We can take this load off in less than a second, which is very, very fast. And that is going to be needed if we're going to put more renewables on the grid. Our smart grid might look like something like this, which involves all sorts of different communication networks, and to make it possible to connect up small wind, etc. in the future. So, signs of change. Industrial companies and local bodies want to help us. So I see that as a sign of change. They're happy to help, as long as they get paid, but they're happy to help us increase the security of supply and keep the lights on. People are starting to think differently about the grid. They now understand that you must have a strong, robust grid if we're going to take renewables around. And our aggregation should avoid unnecessary thermal power plants and will ultimately reduce emissions from there. So there we go. And a greener and more robust grid is going to be needed. And smart grids will involve more demand-side participation, which we're seeing. So that's all I have to say. I've kept it short and sweet, so I hope happy with that. Is that all right? Good, thank you.